Hello guys, in this video I'm going to be showing you how to set up fan control, which is a very easy to set up software and it's a very handy software to use. So first of all we need to download the software. You're going to go to Google, you're going to type fan control and search, and this is going to be the first option that you're going to see. So you're going to go to their page and then you're going to download it. So after the software has finished downloading, you want to install it into your system. So once you've done downloading, you're going to get a zip file like this. It's called fan control.zip. So you're going to extract it, and from here you can start setting up the application. So we're going to skip to where we need to do an initial setup, especially on the BIOS, and then we can continue on. Another thing you might want to do before you start is you want to enter your BIOS. In my case, I'm using an MSI motherboard, so the BIOS looks like this. You might want to go to hardware monitor or where your fan control is, and you want to set all your fans to default. In my case, I have a CPU fan, a system fan, 3 system fans and 1 CPU fan. The CPU fan is PWM and the system fans are DC fans, which means they are controlled by voltage. So you might want to set all of them at a default so that the fan control doesn't conflict with your BIOS when it's trying to set up, when it's trying to ramp up the speed or configure anything else. So that's one thing you might want to do. By the end of this, you should be able to configure your fans to be able to know which fan you're controlling, and also you should be able to create simple fan graphs that you can use to control your fans. So once you've installed your software, the first thing when you open it, you're going to be greeted with this, and you're going to do this assisted setup. So assisted setup helps you configure the starting point and the threshold to which each fan starts and stops. So it's going to do an automatic scan of all your fans with these sensors which have already been ticked. These are the default sensors, and so it's going to start trying to set every fan to 60 and try to figure out which fan is which. So we're going to wait a few, like 3 to 4 minutes, as it configures the fans. As you can hear, the fans have been ramping up. And now we just wait for it to configure all the fans. In the video, there's going to be timestamps of fixed fan speed linked to CPU and GPU, fan speed all on auto, and a hybrid fan setup. So if you want, you can jump to the timeline to where you want to see all these setups. So now it has found 3 fans. My PC has 3 fans and 2 GPU fans. My GPU has 2 fans. So it's trying to test the stop percentage detection, where the fan, at what percentage of power that the fan is going to stop. So on these 3 fans, I have one PWM, there's one one PWM, there's 2 which are DC fans. So DC fans are normally controlled by voltage, so the more voltage the fan gets, the faster it spins. And PWM fans have a fixed voltage, but they have a fourth pin which normally allows it to control the speed of the fan. So this one, the threshold has been found at 27. This other fans is still trying to test the threshold. Once it has finished detecting all the fans, you're going to identify and name your fans. So in order to do this, you're going to use your software to just check inside your case. And let's say the CPU fan, as you can see, when I set it to 0, it goes all the way up to 0. And when I set it to 100, the speed ramps up. So we can rename this CPU fan and put it back at 50. Fan 3, we can test it at 100. And we can see it's the front top fan. When you put it at 0, it goes all the way. Since it's a DC fan, it goes all the way and it stops completely because there's no more voltage going to it. Fan 4, same thing. When you put fan 4 at 0, it goes all the way and stops. So we're going to put them all back at 50%, and we're going to rename fan 3. We're going to rename fan 3 as a PC top and front top. And front bottom. And fan 1 is the back fan, so we're going to rename it as back. And I'm going to click OK. And then once you finish that, we're going to get this window of settings. We're going to click Start Minimized, and then we're going to click Hide the Redundant Spinned RPM section. We're going to click OK. In order to show it back, we can click here. We can show the cards, hide the cards, and show them back up. I also like to click columns mode so that all my fan curves are in a column. So things like this fan which is being detected here, fan number 5, we don't have a fan header for this, so with this we can move it to the bottom, or we can just hide it. We can click on it and move it all the way up to the bottom, or move the GPU fan on top. That way we don't have to bother with these ones. So in case you have a fan that you don't want to be detected, you can have it hidden, or you can not move it all the way up to the bottom. So now once we're here, we can start doing a simple setup. So in order to control anything on the fan, you have to click this. You have to click this toggle button over here in order to be able to control anything on the fan. The speed, the time it stops, or the time it moves back up and down. So that's the first part of the video where we do the initial setup, and now we can go into doing the different types of graphs. Use your software to just check inside your case, and let's say the CPU fan, as you can see, when I set it to 0, it goes all the way up to 0. And when I set it to 100, the speed ramps up. So we can rename this CPU fan. And put it back at 50. Fan 3, we can test it at 100. And you can see it's the front top fan. When you put it at 0, it goes all the way. Since it's a DC fan, it goes all the way and it stops completely because there's no more voltage going to it. Fan 4, same thing. When you put fan 4 at 0, it goes all the way and stops. So we're going to put them all back at 50%, and we're going to rename fan 3. So now that we have all the fans labeled, we can do the first setup, which is a fixed fan speed setup. So in my case, my CPU fan is normally very loud, and my GPU heats up and it also has a very loud fan. So in that case, I want to control the back fan, and I don't put it on a curve. I click here, I put it on manual control. So in manual control, I put it up to 80. The CPU fan, I click it, I don't put it on a curve, I put it on manual control, and I leave it at 50%. The front top fan, I normally put it at 100. The front bottom fan, I normally put it at 100. Since my GPU gets very hot and the fans are small, so they get very loud, I normally don't like to control the GPU fans, so I normally leave it at default. But in the case of if I want to put this setup, maybe I can do it at manual and maybe put it at around 80. And as you can see, the RPM is ramping up and it becomes very, very loud. The other fan, I can also put it on manual and put it at 80, and now it will become even louder, and you can hear it very, very loud. So this is how you set up a fixed fan curve. Now we're going to move on to the second type of setup. On the second, so first, after we've done a fixed fan curve, we can click here and save configuration, user config. So we can save as, and we can say fixed, and click on save. So now we have a fixed fan curve which has been saved. Then we can do fan speed linked to CPU or GPU. So in order to link the fan speed to a GPU, first we'll need to create a graph. And in order to create a CPU graph, we can click here. We can go all the way. Let me reduce the speed of this GPU. It's become very loud, so let me leave it at default. So to create a fan curve, we can click here and add graph. Add graph fan curve. So on this graph, we can click CPU graph. We can add another graph and name it GPU graph. So for the GPU, we need to click a temperature source. So temperature source, you can see we have the CPU temperature source. You can see TJ max. Never link your fan to TJ max. TJ max is too high, and your fan will always be at 100 when it doesn't need to. So just link it to the CPU package temperatures. So we can go all the way down, and here we have our GPU temperature. For the CPU graph, same thing. We can click on either your hottest core, the core which you think uses the most power. So for my case, my CPU core 3, this is the one which normally heats up the most, so I normally use it to configure the graph. So now this is the CPU graph which is on CPU. This flat fan curve, I think we can just delete it. We don't need it. So we can edit from here. So to edit, we can start at around 30%. So the far left curve, this is your fan ramping. So from 30% all the way up to 100%. So I normally like to start my fans at 30% speed, and the temperature, it scales all the way up to 120, but I don't think anybody's CPU here scales all the way up, so I leave it at 100. And if you go back, you can see that the temperature goes all the way up to from 30 degrees Celsius all the way up to 100. So once the setup is like this, I normally like my CPU not to exceed 70 degrees. And then now I can start changing the fan curve so that it becomes a smoother fan curve. Instead of just ramping up directly, it becomes smoother. So I just click points on the graph and I move them accordingly so that it becomes a curve instead of a slope. So this is the slope I normally use on both my CPU and my GPU. So I normally copy this graph, I click OK, I go to my GPU and I click edit, and I paste the graph over here. So once the graph has been pasted, the GPU graph will copy the same things. So once we've set up the graph, we can now go to whichever fan. Let's say the front bottom fan blows air directly to the GPU. So we'll want to link it to the GPU graph. So we'll click here, we'll go here, and we'll unclick on manual control, and then you click this drop down which says graph, and you can map it to the GPU graph. So now when this front bottom fan is going to ramp up according to how hot the GPU is. Despite the GPU not being controlled by this software, the fan will still be controlled by the graph, and the graph is linked to the GPU. So it's like a triangle. So depending on how hot the GPU gets, this fan will ramp up depending on that. On the front top fan, maybe this fan blows air directly to the CPU. So we're going to do the same thing. We're going to click here. We're going to remove this manual apply, and then we're going to click it on CPU graph. So this fan is going to be linked to the CPU, and this other fan is going to be linked to the GPU. In case of the CPU, we can click here, same thing. So the CPU graph is still linked to its own graph, the CPU graph over here. And the back fan you can just leave it at default, or you can also link it to any of the graphs that you want. But the back fan doesn't have a lot of impact. I normally like to leave mine at 80 so that I have a positive pressure inside my case. And that's how you configure all the fans in a fixed fan setup mode. After doing all of this, you can just click here, click save configuration as, and then you can see fixed fan speeds. No, linked, not fixed, linked fan speeds, and then click on save. And then okay, so now we finished controlling the linked fan speed, and you can move to the other section. To put your fans all on automatic so that you don't have to interfere with them, you can just click here. So your PC is the one which is going to control the fan graph. As you remember, on the BIOS we clicked default, and default is going to depend on how hot your case gets or how hot your PC, CPU or GPU gets. So just by clicking this, you can this is already a automatic fan speed control. But if you want this software to control it, you can click back here, and you can go back to the graph section over here, and the software has this automatic. It's a better fan curve, but I found it to be very good. It's slightly higher than the default, meaning your case will be slightly cooler than how the default fan configurations are. So you can do this auto better, so you can name it auto CPU. And the temperature source same. You're going to click a CPU core that you think is hottest, that is coldest, the one which does the most work either. So auto CPU, and then you're going to make another one, auto GPU. Temperature source, the GPU. So this, okay, my GPU is going haywire again. So auto GPU, you can link it to maybe the front bottom fan, auto GPU. The GPU, you can also link it to this, so we control it, and click manual and click on auto GPU. As you can hear, my GPU is not ramping up as much. I don't know if you can hear from this. So manual, auto GPU. Same thing for the CPU graph. You can click it on click here, click on auto CPU, auto CPU. The back fan you can leave at default, but you can also give it because it's very close to the CPU, you can also leave it on auto CPU. So now all of the fans are linked to an automatic graph. And in the case of a hybrid setup, in case you want to do a hybrid setup, so let's say your back fan, you want to do it on manual, you can leave it at 80. Your CPU fan, you can do it on auto and link it to let's say your CPU, your front top fan, you can link it to your CPU graph. Your GPU fan, you can set it on default so that the GPU controls itself. The front bottom fan can be an auto GPU. The front top can be a CPU graph. The CPU fan can be an auto CPU. So this way everything cannot be is not linked to another, but it all depends on. So like when will you use an auto configuration? So let's say the back fan, you can leave it at 80 at all the time. This way your case always has a positive pressure. But the CPU fan can be an automatic CPU, so that the CPU fan follows this graph, but the front top, maybe the front top is doing more work or is doing less work, and you want it on a CPU graph, so that this graph You can edit all the way you want it, but it won't affect the this is the GPU graph. The CPU graph, you can edit it all the way you want it, but it won't affect the CPU fan curve. It can only affect the specific fans which are linked to it. So in the case when you have maybe you have an AIO, you want it controlled differently as compared to all the other fans in the system. So this is how you will link it, but the CPU isn't controlled by it. The GPU is a default, but the front top fan is controlled by how the GPU ramps up and down. So after doing all of this, you'll have learned how to control this fan software. Another thing, you can save this configuration as not on linked. I did the wrong thing. Yeah, you can save it as hybrid and save. So all these fan configurations, in order to load a different configuration, you can just click here, fixed, hybrid, linked, and user configure. This is the first initial setup when you first boot up the software. So there's the fixed curve speed, there's the hybrid curve speed, there's a fixed fan speed. We can also do another configuration in case your PC is always at 100% all the time. So we can also do a manual one, and in this one we just max everything to 100, and we can save this configuration. Now we can save as max all, save. So all the fans will be at max speed all the time. And in order to change configurations, it's very easy. You click here and the configurations are here. So you can do fixed fan curves, you can do any other configuration, hybrid. Let's go back to the software. So another thing you can do with this software, you can say that it starts, in order for this software to be able to control your Windows, in order for this software to be able to control how your Windows starts and stops, it needs to be on all the time. So you'll have to click on start with Windows, so that whenever Windows starts, also this software starts. And I think that's about it. You can change appearance how you want, and that's about it for this fixed fan curve software. The rest of these features I normally don't use, and I never found a use for them. But in case you want, you can check somebody else's video on maybe this, like a mixed fan curve. I don't know how this works, but it's crazy the amount of things you can do. So if you're really into controlling your fans completely, you can look for another video and check how this works. But for now, I was just showing you the default configurations, the easy setup, the ones which will not disturb you, and the ones which will be good for you for a long time. So thank you for watching my video, and you can click on the next one and leave a like and comment and subscribe.